For our first segment today, I'm privileged to welcome Dr. Christy Arthur on the podcast as we take a deeper look into our medical features found in our latest issue. Hi, Dr. Arthur. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Hi. Thank you
glad
for
to have
having
you.
me.
And thank you for being part of our issue. We have a couple of stories that we'll touch on briefly today and talk about the expertise that you're offering in those. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
So tell us first about your background. What led you to where you are today?
That's a great question. So, I have known that I wanted to be a doctor since I was about 9. I went to a career fair at my elementary school, and I spent the entire time with my pediatrician playing with the reflex hammers and the empty syringes, and I was just hooked. And reading the health section in the newspaper every week in our paper was like
Committed.
the highlight. And then when I was in high school, I was able to go to governor's school and shadow a pediatrician. And that really cemented my love for medicine. And I was fortunate enough to work with Carillion for 17 years as a family practice doctor, and really learned that I enjoyed helping people understand what was going on with their bodies. I really love understanding the physiology and then translating it into a metaphor or some sort of a picture, or finding a way for people to be able to understand better.
Because some of it's really difficult to understand.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like, I always tell people, it's like when my car mechanic tries to tell me what's wrong with my car.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. If you tell me what's under the hood, I have no idea, body or car. So.
Right. So figuring out ways to relate it to what people understand, really, I love doing that. And I also love the connection that I have with patients. And then the pandemic happened.
Oh, yeah. Right. That.
And everybody started doing medicine differently. And I was able to see patients virtually and work from home, and discovered that I actually really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
That got me thinking about, well, how could I do this differently in other ways? And I also really wanted to continue to work towards having more connection with my patients, since that was my favorite part. And that led me to pursue a life coaching certification. And that actually really enhanced my joy in medicine as well, because in Western medicine, we tend to separate out like the body from everything else, but it's all connected. And I had so many patients who were dealing with a lot of stress-related issues, and I didn't have a lot of tools to help them. And coaching really helped me to learn to listen differently and more deeply, and look for clues for where I could find little angles in to start making small differences with people that then grew to big differences, and really helped to tackle the softer things, the stress and that sort of thing that people were dealing with in their lives.
Right, because you're not even when you feel bad, like you feel bad, right? That doesn't include the stress that comes with feeling bad.
Right.
That's a whole nother level of just like on top of everything else. Now you just feel worse.
Right.
Ugh.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
right.
and so this actually led to you opening up your own business, your own primary care
Right.
spot. So
Right.
please tell us more about that, because that's a big step, but it's pretty recent, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I just opened up my own primary care practice in January, and it was really that desire to have more connection with patients that influenced me to make that step, as well as the pandemic and those changes, and realizing that, hey, look, tomorrow isn't promised. Now's the time. And it's been great. I love the freedom to be able to have more time with people, and the freedom to be able to handle simple things in different ways, sometimes with a phone call, sometimes with a virtual visit. But I really enjoy the ability to have more connection with my patients.
I personally love the telemedicine, just because it was such a lifesaver during the pandemic, right? Where we all need to see somebody and don't know where to go, or if it's safe to go to the ER or whatever.
Right.
And so I love that. And I think it's very interesting that you're still offering that, because now it's a little bit easier to get into your doctor's offices, a little, less concern over the pandemic kind of results.
Right.
So that's really interesting that that's still an option for patients.
Yeah, definitely. I really want to eliminate as many barriers as possible for people to get the care that they want. And yeah, how much more time do we all get in our days without having to travel everywhere?
Right? Oh, so much. I can't even go into all that, because my boss would yell at me, but it's great. And so, what you did, you're talking about relating to patient, not relating to, but really connecting with patients. And I think that's an important part, because what you do is so critical to understanding the person's body and their personality does tie into that a little bit, how they care for themselves and things like that. So all that to say, when you're connecting with patients, I think that that's something I hear from doctors a lot. So for other doctors who might be more interested in taking that path that you did, following your dream of really, going after that, do you have any advice for them or, any wisdom that you'd like to share?
Yeah, certainly. What I would first say is there are so many resources. I first started becoming interested in direct primary care back in like 2015, 2016, and it was still sort of a very mavericky thing to do. There were people doing it, but there wasn't a lot of structure and resources. But now there are tons of online resources for striking out on your own. The DPC Alliance is one, DPC Frontier is another, all sorts of checklists online, and I would say the community is so welcoming. Like other doctors are always willing to be mentors and part of Facebook groups and answering questions about, hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? So there is a lot of help and support. The most important thing is to not be afraid to ask for it.
I love that. And thank you, because I feel like, on TV, it feels very competitive. And that answer did not feel competitive in any way. Because we are such a, as Chris Morrill put it many years ago, train town to brain town, there are a lot of healthcare options in the Valley. And so I think that that's wonderful that answer did not feel, like you're really open to helping others or finding others who can help you. I think that's awesome.
Right. Well, and I do just want to say too, like, I think it's important for everybody to have choices. And that includes doctors having choices the way that they want to practice, and also patients having choices for what kind of a doctor they want to see or what sort of a system they want to be seen in. And so, I think it's all about, there's a niche for everybody.
Yeah. You made an interesting point in terms of you being, picking your schedule, picking the patients, that kind of thing. You guys must be exhausted. Doctors must be so tired with the last 2 to 3 years of what you've been going through. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? I know that, we hadn't really discussed that prior, but I'm curious as to sort of the phases that you've been going through and maybe where you're at now versus where you were a year or even 3 years ago.
Right. Yeah. So I think like everybody, the first phase was denial,
Sure. Across the world.
Hearing, oh, this is going on in China. And I was like, oh, but I think it's going to be contained there. And, naively thinking that, right? But wishing for the best. And so I think that first phase was just denial, and then the realization of, oh, this is happening. And then immediately for me, and for all of us at Carilion at the time, it was, okay, how do we keep our patients safe? And how do we figure this out? And so it was an amazing time of innovation. I mean, lots of new processes were set up really quickly, and that was sort of inspiring to be like, oh, these things that you told us would take years and years to set up, all of this telemedicine, we get it set up in like a month.
The technology is interesting, right? And I'd love to come back to that, but please.
So, but at the same time, it was also difficult because, as you know, there were a lot of differing opinions as to the best course of treatment, or there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy, and not being able to have in-person meetings meant that I think the divisions were even stronger, because it was just very difficult to have Zoom meetings that allowed the space and intimacy that you need to really flesh out differing opinions. And we were all adjusting to Zoom as well. So while it was an interesting dichotomy of the two things. So we're all pulling together to do these things that we know we need to do. And at the same time, in the background, there's all these differing opinions. And without the communication, it made things a little bit harder. And then, there was, first and foremost, all doctors want their patients to do well.
Right.
And it was just difficult with so much misinformation on the internet. And I think that wore a lot of people down, a lot of healthcare providers down to be continually feeling like we're trying to get the message across, and it just doesn't always feel like it's getting there. And just the complete overwhelm with the number of patients that were in the emergency room. And we in primary care, in my practice, we were having a little bit of the opposite problem, which was we were really only, for a certain period of time, we were really only seeing people virtually, and our numbers were down. So that caused some strife as well in terms of pay reductions and that sort of thing. So
it's a lot to go through. Yeah. And so we have another story in the July, August issue about nurses. And so what they're going through as well, excuse me, and talking about, is there a nursing shortage and the challenges and the obstacles that you all have faced? And some of that is similar to what you're describing, obviously. And so not that your job is ever not demanding, right? Because you're saving lives, you're helping people with their health. This is not something that just, I can go home at the end of the day, not have to think about it. I think about work. And so I'm sure that that's the complete opposite for you. We're going to talk about sleep later because we're talking about that. But anyway, going back to that, I just think it's really remarkable how you all have pulled through. And so thank you. I think on behalf of me, of the Valley, of the residents, thank you, and the entire healthcare industry, doctors, nurses, everybody who's been part of that in helping us keep our health and safety is just so critical. So thanks. If nobody's told you today.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Real quick, just to circle back to that, the technology. So things that have grown, has there been anything that really has maybe surprised or enticed you in recent years? Even in the last decade, because I know that so many things are evolving. We have a piece on exotic procedures and how new equipment and things like that are making things so much easier for surgeries. Is there anything that maybe stands out in your mind that way?
Yeah, so many things. I will say a few things. So one that immediately came to mind is patients with their home blood pressure cuffs. It now can Bluetooth it right to their phone, and they send me these beautiful graphs.
Bluetooth blood pressure. Who knew? Wow.
I know. And so, which is really nice because every time I check a patient's blood pressure in the office, and I don't even wear a white coat. You
don't walk out like a TV character?
No,
come on.
I don't. And it's just high. It's nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking to try to get there on time. And there's a myriad of factors. Having the home blood pressure readings is really nice. And the technology to make it easier to get it to me is really nice.
That's amazing. Because I do have to run across the parking lot to get upstairs. And by the time I sit down, I'm like, okay, I know I don't normally breathe this heavily in a sit-down meeting, but gosh, I feel like I've just run a marathon.
Right.
That's a good point. That's great. So real quick, again, we touched on a couple of pieces that are in July, August issue. We also have a piece on chronic illness. And so you share a few tips for patients on how to handle their diseases. I was curious as to if you could just do a really brief overview of what chronic illness means, some examples that we could learn from and understand that we might need to look out for.
Yeah, I thought that was a great question. And it really made me think because I think chronic illness, I think what it means to the patient is that they are dealing with not being able to do the things that they used to be able to do.
Okay.
In whatever way, shape, or form. It can be various ways that your body, I always tell people, it's really hard when our body is not doing what we want it to do.
Right, exactly.
And so that's sort of the way I think about chronic illness. So some examples could be something like fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain condition, chronic back pain, like lumbar disc disease, or long COVID. We're now seeing that. And that can be like a lot of breathlessness and just not having the endurance that maybe you had before. Or chronic respiratory disease with asthma or COPD.
We do have a subject in there. She has alpha-gal syndrome, which I had not really known anything about until I started reading that piece and was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that could stem from, anyway.
Yes. So alpha-gal, which basically makes you allergic to meat.
Right.
Yeah. So that is what, and that is to say that the diagnosis is important, yes, but the way that, from my perspective, the way that I help patients be able to still find joy and meaning in their lives, even if they can't do the things that they used to be able to do. That's where I see my role in that. And let's look at the things that we can optimize, and let's look at the things that we can so the things that are going well, let's get them better. And the things that aren't going well, let's see if we can mitigate that in some fashion. So.
Well, there are some good tips that you shared. Do you mind sharing a couple extras that, it's about taking care of your body and getting sleep, but, maybe there are others that you have that you really enforce to patients to try at home?
Yeah. I mean, I think the most important thing is it always feels like a luxury to take time for ourselves, right? Like, meditation, exercise, and eating right. Those are the first, and sleep. Those are the first 4 things that go out the door when I get stressed, right?
Agreed.
And they're the things that should really, without that, you can't really have the resilience to be able to do anything else. So I always tell patients, these are not optional. You have got to find a way to get out in sunlight as much as possible. Even if that means you sit on your front porch, getting fresh air, taking time for themselves, doing some sort of stress reduction. Walking is a great stress reducer if they can do it. But if not, like meditation or even just taking a relaxing bath, that sort of thing. And the other piece to that is connection and community, and finding groups, groups of people who are dealing with the same type of chronic illness can be really, really, really helpful.
Sure, to know you're not alone. I mean, that's one of the most critical things. We feel that way for everything, but I imagine in this instance, it's especially important.
Right. And even if mobility is limited, there are so many groups on Facebook and other online platforms that it's not the same, but it's better than nothing.
Sure. You're not alone on an island. I mean,
Right.
Man.
Right.
So we've talked about sleep a few times. So I think that's really important. And actually, so Dr. Arthur, she was part of our women's conference Reclaim, which we did earlier this spring. And she did an amazing presentation on the power of sleep. And I've been trying to remember these tips and take them in every night. And I got to admit, I think I'm sleeping a little better. 5 out of 7 nights, maybe. Do you mind sharing a few tips on a better night's sleep with listeners who I'm sure are desperate for the advice?
Sure. I thought about it and I made up a mnemonic to kind of help.
Perfect. Let's hear it.
So think about the word beds. Okay. So B is for a bedtime routine. And that also means going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time, which is so much fun here in the summer.
My middle school teacher husband's like, oh, I got to go to bed before midnight now?
I know. But having a routine to signal to your body that it's time to go to bed, and then going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time really does help to set these circadian rhythms, which helps for the hormones that your brain produces to help with sleep to get in sync. The second one is environment. And that's like your bed environment. So having the room at the right temperature, not having distractions. I love a white noise machine. I could not sleep without it because I'm a really light sleeper. And so anything I hear wakes me up. And pets in the bed can be a really big distraction for sleep.
You're going to hurt some people's feelings, I think.
I know. It doesn't necessarily need the pet. It just needs to be something that you're aware of. And, if you recognize, okay, my pet's getting me up a lot.
Right. I've seen the Instagram reels. I guess they're TikTok reels, but I'm 100, so I see them later. But the ones like at the middle of the night where the owners are recording at night when they're sleeping and the cats are jumping all over, like the woman's just trying to sleep and she wonders why she can't sleep at night. She doesn't realize how often this cat is like batting her in the face and like playing with her. Anyway.
Right. So just something to be aware of.
Yep.
The third thing is drugs. So that's like caffeine and alcohol.
Okay.
Caffeine, even if you drink a cup of coffee at noon, it will still keep you up. And on average, people lose an hour of sleep a night due to caffeine.
You don't see me, but I'm hiding my coffee mug right now over under the table. Shoot.
Yeah. So just something to be aware of.
Okay.
And alcohol, while it will make people feel very sleepy, it often causes a rebound later in the night, usually around 1, 2, 3 a.m., where people just wake up.
That's a pretty common misconception, right? That they think, I'll just have a drink and be sleepy.
Right.
It's interesting.
For women approaching menopause, it also can cause that night sweat that happens at 2 or 3 in the morning. So
okay, good tip.
Yeah. And then the last one is stress. So anything that you can do to alleviate stress, and along with this goes get out of the bed if you can't sleep.
Huh. So I'm not supposed to lay there for an hour in frustration, cursing myself and counting sheep?
No. So if you don't fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes.
That's it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They recommend getting out of bed because you don't want the bed to be associated with frustration.
And you don't want to wake your spouse who might murder you in your sleep.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
It's for everybody's safety.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's another good tip.
Yeah. Yeah.
So beds, perfect. I love it. Easy to remember too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. So let's get into the fun part. We've talked about some really good stuff, but I want to talk about you personally as far as what is your favorite part of the job? You've mentioned connecting with patients, so I suspect it might be related to that. But what else do you just really love about what you do?
Yeah, that was a great question too. So I'm such a geek. I love getting first crack at stuff. You know, if patients come to me and they have something really weird happen, I love researching it and being well, what could this be from? And what else can we think about? And what other testing should we do? I really love thinking about why did this happen and how can we prevent it from happening again, if that's possible.
Very Sherlockian of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love too that I get to deal with everybody's system because there's so many things that people are not sure if they're related. And I'm oh, wait, I remember 3 years ago you had this and now you're having this. And that makes me think maybe about this. And it's kind of you're right, a treasure hunt.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty fun then, put it that way.
Yeah.
Perfect. And so in your limited free time, because it sounds like you're busy working, but where do you and your family love to go, play, do in the region? Where are you guys hanging out?
That's a great question. We love Carbons Cove.
Okay, that's a good
one. I have
one.
a son who is into mountain biking, and I am trying mountain biking, but it's not as fearless as he is, which makes it pretty tough.
Yeah.
I like the fire roads, and he likes the steep, gauntlets.
Oh,
so
yeah.
There you go.
I'll bike with you then.
But I love it. I love Carbons Cove. I love getting out to the river. We have tubes. We tube down the river. And I have a paddle board, and I go there frequently. And we also love going to the pool and picnics. There's so many great places around here.
You got a big summer ahead then.
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Arthur, for being our guest on From Print to Podcast and sharing such great healthcare advice with our listeners. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. We are so thankful for her advice, not only on today's podcast, but in our jam-packed Top Docs issue. You can read our features on chronic illness, primary care, nursing champions, and so much more in our July-August issue on newsstands now, or you can read more at theroanoker.com.